Right now, everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, and the cybercriminals are hiding in the conversation. Cybercriminals use social engineering loaded with urgency and fear to successfully prey on your company, your employees, and your customers. Spear phishing is just one of 13 types of email threats. Barracuda has identified these 13 types and shows you how you can protect your company, your customers, and your reputation. Find out about the 13 email threat types and Barracuda email protection. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Follow us on LinkedIn for updates across our organization, show highlights, and more. You can find us by searching for Security Weekly Productions on LinkedIn. We've been joined by Mandy Logan and Lee Neely. Welcome to the news.
Thank you.
We talk about AI and ML. There was a research paper that, even in the abstract, had a lot of big words. Like, I feel like it was written purposely. I feel like they went. Also, there's another article that I swear was written by ChatGPT. I feel like this abstract was written by ChatGPT. Like, they fed the research paper to ChatGPT and like, write me an abstract in really big words for this research paper. So it says the construction of undetectable backdoors also sheds light on the related issue of robustness to adversarial examples. In particular, by constructing undetectable backdoor for an adversarially robust learning algorithm, we can produce a classifier that is indistinguishable from a robust classifier, but where every input is an adversarial example. I think this means you can trick ML into always recommending Bud Light when people are looking for beer. Did I get that? Did I summarize that well? I don't know if you read the full abstract that's linked to my article number 2, which was a repost from Schneier on security, whose comment was, turns out securing ML is hard, right? Garbage in, garbage out. I think there's a lot of examples we can draw from that.
Yeah, there's a lot more to that, right? Like you start to talk about data scientists and how their deterministic model is being represented, programmed, and iterated through. Like that could be proprietary, that could be something that's open, that's a model that they may be leveraging for specific use cases. So it really depends. And as much as I like to think the offensive piece and nature of this, undetectable backdoor, we're seeing cases where AI is pretty limited in its understanding and fundamental flaws of writing good code and understanding the full gist of what we're trying to do. And if it is able to be done on the offensive piece with the right prompt engineer and ability to know the model, you can output the same deterministic defenses that's going to make this undetectable offensive tool defendable. So I can't seem to agree with where they're going with this. There's a ton of things that you can do against ML and AI right now, and from an offensive standpoint, there's a ton of researching companies that are coming out that we're looking at ways to, taint the models, taint the ingestion, look at the process, build very robust data sets that can look for some of this, but it's very complicated, and this is a broad article.
Because they reference random Fourier features, which I don't pretend to know. I thought Fourier was like a way to smooth out your machine learning algorithm.
Basically bringing in your bell curve and getting your means variables from the outsides to a number that is more sustainable across the large set for the model to continue iterating to a more precise nature.
Right.
So I don't know. I disagree with their assertion and really. The data scientists that are doing this and doing this well in conjunction with security people from the offensive side, like Muhax and Will and some of the guys over at NVIDIA, they're doing some really, really cool stuff that is the exact opposite of what this is saying.
Well, Sam? I think the point of this thing is that you can put a mark in the input that is not visible, like a steganography. Mm-hmm. And so you can train it to recognize these flags that you put in the training model, which nobody else will see. And you can never prove that hasn't been done.
Correct. That was the focus of this research paper. And
the
so
non-assertion
can those
of
marks,
flag,
if
right?
you can't detect that that's in the input data, that means you can influence the input data without detection? That's what they're getting at, right?
The AI will look at subtleties of the input that will be obvious to the human looking at it,
Right.
just like steganography. And so you could get it to misunderstand it, to respond to certain flags, and you would never know that your AI was clean and hadn't had stuff like that put in as a backdoor.
Right.
Okay. But couldn't the prompt engineer, I guess if you have the data model and you are the programmer and you're working with the prompt engineers in order to build the robustness on the other side of this, can't you tell the data set to evaluate, I guess depending on what the flag is and how subtle that is, just like we're able to determine.
Right. These were from third party.
extent,
I
if
think
it's
they
written
described
by
it as third party data sets, right? Like external.
This is the problem, is you have to, unless you control the training set,
Yep.
you can't control the output, and you can't stop it from finding strange mathematical patterns in the training set, because that's exactly what the AI does.
Yeah, most of the training sets are either very large and public, or they're proprietary and used for very specific things, and you have no visibility into them.
And it would be really expensive to make your own training set, so that's highly impractical.
Yes, unless you're OpenAI and doing this, there's not a lot of places that have good training sets.
They're just scraping it from the web, like Reddit and such, so they don't really know that they're training it on clean data.
Stack Overflow, you look at how many bad examples are in there, and they're using those data sets. I mean, you're wondering why we're getting so much insecure code output by ChatGPT right now. Like, it doesn't even know what's right and wrong anymore.
Well, I think ChatGPT gives you something that's just as accurate as if you Googled and took the top 5 hits and copy and pasted from it.
So perfect. ChatGPT could write all my code because that's how I do it.
That's how yeah.
It's going to say probably as good as I do.
Problem solved. Right?
A similar story, Sam, indirect prompt injection on Bing Chat.
Yeah, I thought this is fantastic. And the first 3 times I read it, I couldn't understand what they did. And then I saw what they did. They add in a comment field on a web page something you will never see that tells the AI-based assistant, ignore the instructions the programmer put here and follow these instructions instead. Talk to the client, get their real name, and get them to click on a link going to this domain that contains their name or their social security number or their credit card number. It's basically automating the whole phishing process. Wow. It's very brilliant.
So it's tainting the data set that it's scraping via a secondary or tertiary scrape model, right? Like the model itself scraping.
Every AML system feeds the query data back in, okay? And that's as simple as it gets. Now, ChatGPT literally today or yesterday put out an article stating that they will not, OpenAI rather, sorry, they will not use the queries to add to the training data, but realize that you guys have explained one of the biggest problems is that data is not necessarily normalized, not necessarily cleaned, not necessarily explained properly. It is simply dumped wholesale into the hopper, if you will. And as a matter of fact, the GPT-4 and 5, which are the ones coming out next, are supposed to have over 100 trillion associations put in there into that hopper. And I can't even imagine they're going to look at them, much less clean them.
Well, but poisoning the data set is an expensive attack and takes a long time. This is a real
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's cheap. Poisoning a data set is super cheap. If I can tell ChatGPT to build me queries that will poison its own data set and then feed them back into ChatGPT.
Yeah, but you're still playing the long game there, though, Josh. I think
that's a prompt, not a data set taint.
Yeah, see, this here you can do with something as simple as cross-site scripting, where you just add some text to the stuff.
Will you just knock your microphone right over in the middle of a podcast?
Yes, he did. He's so excited.
Yeah,
I was going to say the data set training, once it's done and trained, that's old data, it's stagnant. That's what is being used. The continual stuff is stuff that is being prompted, and you're querying that model from the prompt side of it. It's not actually retraining the initial data set. So tainting a data set would require you to build a data set, which is highly computationally expensive.
Well, if you used AI to do it, it would be cheap, but you have to do it in advance. It's like a supply chain attack.
No. Speaking of supply chain attacks, Hold on. Searching.
Where are you going?
Searching.
Which one are you going to?
Let's go.
Buffering.
Searching the blockchain.
Let's go to 32.
Oh, no. We're just going to go straight there.
We're just going to go straight there. What's interesting is we have been tracking, I'll leave we as an ambiguous term, the Black Lotus UEFI bootkit since it appeared somewhere. And then it got picked up by some news outlets. And we're like, wow, that's the thing. Someone's trying to sell a UEFI bootkit that includes a secure boot bypass that they called Black Lotus. So those of us working in the space, myself included, I was like, that's kind of interesting. Like, I wonder what secure boot bypass they have in there. Is it one that's already been published and we know about, or do they have a new secure boot bypass? Now, I think we might have said this when we covered this initially. If you get a new secure boot bypass, that means no one knows where that particular vulnerability could lie. So we don't know which programs, binaries to revoke in the secure boot DBX. And so that would be bad. That you would charge a lot of money for this. Black Lotus is like, what, $5,000 they were charging? Yeah, $5,000 for it. So I think we summarized back then that they probably didn't have a secure boot like 0-day style bypass. If you're playing along at home and you guess that they were using an already existing secure boot vulnerability, you would be correct. If you guessed that it was baton drop, you would be 100% correct. Like, yes, baton drop for $1,000 or maybe $5,000. So that I linked to that at CVE 2022 21894. Essentially, at a very, very high level, they manipulate memory such that it removes or disables the secure boot policy.
Interesting.
Way more complicated than that. But Tyler, would you agree with my very high level summary of baton drop?
Yeah, without getting into all the nitty gritty parts of that and how that is actually doing, that's exactly it. I mean, you don't need to go deeper than that, but it is very interesting. If you have not looked at the CV20, the 2022 baton drop, there's a couple of GitHubs out there. If you have not looked at that and how that's working, there's a bunch of ways that this has been weaponized outside of what you'll see here, and you can start to think very quickly of ways to leverage this for, turning off Defender, evading, injecting your payload as part of a driver load, putting a kernel level rootkit on initial execution and maintaining that persistence via UEFI. Like, this is just scratching the surface of this, and we've seen this being developed in actors' kits for a substantial amount of time. This is just we're just barely starting to get to the public pieces, and being able to buy that source code has been a bit of a process. So,
but the whole thing with 2022 21894 is that you can have bootloaders or OS loaders, right? Because there's a chain; those actually mean different things in the boot process that basically are vulnerable to this, but haven't been revoked in the DBX because it would break too much stuff. So Microsoft's like, oh, we issued a patch for it. I'm like, no, but you really didn't, because that means that still today these vulnerable bootloaders are there, and the initial access vector is just enough privilege on the system to be able to apply these new bootloaders and OS loaders on the system that contain the vulnerability that allow you to bypass secure boot. And also there was a machine owner key put in there as well, so they could put stuff that isn't approved in the boot process, but since they added a machine owner key, they're adding binaries that are signed by your machine owner key, which means the system still secure boots. I think I got all that correct.
Yeah, your boot manager is basically validating the integrity validation piece is getting bypassed because the boot manager is able to skip that and then load the code still within a secure boot environment, which has some bigger implications. I mean, you think about where BitLocker keys are stored and the ability to unlock stuff. This gets very interesting.
This goes beyond boot. I don't understand BitLocker enough to explain the bits and bytes and how that works. But it doesn't matter if BitLocker is enabled on the system. This attack still works because, and someone asked me this question too, and I believe this was the answer. BitLocker happens in a certain point in the boot chain. And basically, if you compromise the processes or the execution flow before the BitLocker mechanisms are put in place, BitLocker doesn't matter, right? I mean, at a high level, Tyler, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, correct.
And would that, whenever it does that to disable HVCI and BitLocker and reboots the machine, would that reboot be noticeable by a user?
Yes. Yeah, you have to actually do a system reset.
A system reset, or would it be just like a blue screen of death, like
I don't think it
like the Zoom Skype machine?
Yeah, I don't think like our Zoom machine. I don't think it blue screens. This is just a reboot. Yeah, soft reboot.
Huh.
Yeah, and you can execute this from within inside of the operating system. So you have to have the administrative access to the OS, which we can compromise that and privilege escalate with 500 different methods. But once you have that, the ability to reboot the machine is trivial and can be scheduled to a time in which is not going to be noticed by the user. And once
but the machine owner key, doesn't it ask for a password when you apply the machine owner key and then ask for that same password when it reboots? I know Linux does that, and I don't know if there's a way. Is there a way around that, or does Windows work similar to Linux in that capacity?
It's outside of the OS, but it depends on how the TPM and the boot process is set up and designed. If you're using like BitLocker with PIN and password, or you've got BitLocker with auto login, like those two mechanisms are completely different, and most orgs don't set even just the PIN. And then you start to talk about the PIN without some of the other protections around the BIOS or the ability to detect password brute forcing. You talk about a 4-digit PIN. Now it's trivial from that side because you're not locking a system out. You're just trying a combination of 10,000 iterations. Pretty straightforward.
But like on Linux, if I have secure boot enabled and I install a kernel module, it goes, hey, you have secure boot enabled. You have to generate a machine owner key, and you have to sign this kernel module, and the machine owner key has to be added into the secure boot process. And it goes, in order to do that, you're going to give me a password. And then I'm going to make you reboot. And when you reboot, you have to enter that same password, and that completes the cycle so that my now kernel module that's signed by my machine owner key can actually work. And that's how it works on Linux. And I'm not sure how they're sidestepping that process, or if it works differently on Windows, or if there's something else at play. Hey, I know who to ask that question to get.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't you? You're asking the question. I'm going to go ask your coworker.
Right, so. that's tolerable. Wait, no, we know exactly who could have the answer to that question.
I'm sitting here like, I know who. Wait, that's who you should be asking.
Right. I didn't think of it till just now.
Oh, how about it's the same guy or same group of folks?
Yeah, it's the same
group of folks.
Same group of folks.
Right.
Well, if you're willing to move on, I'd like to talk about article number 2 because it's more machine learning, and I was very excited by this. The first thing they said is they cracked the new post-quantum algorithm, Crystal's Kyber, but that's not really fair, which I think is Schneier's point. What they did was, if you have a side channel attack, if you can monitor the power consumption of the processor while it does this encryption, then they're able to get in. But the important thing is, that's why I don't think it shows a failure in this algorithm. It shows a failure in all cryptography, which is going to be really hard to fix, which is if you measure a side channel like the radio or the power, and then you use machine learning to really look for subtle patterns in there, then it turns out that all the current mitigations to prevent side channel attacks don't work, like randomizing time and such. So this sounds actually really significant. Another application of how machine learning and AI are going to hurt our security products, because I think almost no implementation of any algorithm would be entirely free of these side channel emanations.
Yeah, when you said the power monitoring side channel attack, that applies to any cryptographic algorithm.
Right. Well, there are some that claim to be constant time, but that's not the same thing as constant power throughout the encryption process. I'm not sure any algorithm could ever achieve that.
I would further
when you need
postulate that the AI capabilities are going to be available and mainstream long before quantum will be. Right now, you're not getting
that's what I was thinking. Quantum. That's what I was thinking, Liam. AI and ML pose more of a threat in this context that we're talking about than does quantum computing to cryptographic algorithms.
The quantum will completely destroy even the fundamental mathematics, but this is going to destroy everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a fundamental hardware weakness, and there's also a fundamental mathematical weakness in many of the algorithms. But right now, the quantum doesn't exist, so it's not a current threat, but the machine learning is a current threat.
Mm.
Yeah, I think I just thinking about this out loud, I think that's kind of fascinating, with the constant time. If you set every one of your operations with that mathematics to be the same length of time in an attempt to avoid that side channel attack, one computation could be very intensive on the processor and take that, say, entire time slice, where the other one is just like adding 2 and 2, and it takes a fraction of the time slice, thus requiring a heck of a lot less power. So, yep, that makes total sense. And also you had me at Crystal's Kyber. So.
Mm.
We have an encryption specialist here, Jeff, and perhaps he could join in the conversation.
Passing on this one.
You get quantum involved and Jeff's hair falls out.
Well, there's no real quantum in this one. In fact, I think you could just as well talk about cracking AES with this attack.
I agree, Sam.
Yeah. But that's not sexy and cool.
Quantum just makes it quicker.
Hey, if Mandy is still here, can we ask Mandy to pick a story?
One of somebody else's story or one of my own?
No, one of yours.
I think a couple people had LastPass. Do you want to talk about LastPass?
Let's talk about LastPass.
I definitely want to talk about the LastPass deal.
Again?
Just an hour ago, like another response from LastPass about this, but I find this fascinating that they targeted the DevOps engineer's home computer and exploited a vulnerable third-party media software package,
Plex,
which enabled remote code execution. Mm-hmm. So going through this, and apparently now Plex, it was stated in one article that the third-party media thing that was exploited was Plex. Plex replied and said that they have not heard that. They don't know anything about that. They don't have any evidence of being compromised. But this has got to be interesting. Now, as they go through how the original attack in August and then this attack, that initially it was not known because there was no common thread between the two attacks to point to it being one attacker. Now that it got deeper, realizing that this second attack used information that could only have been garnered from the first attack,
right?
And then how it went to this DevOps home computer actually went into it being a nation-state actor.
Mm-hmm. So wait, based on what you've just said, it could be the initial attack. I have SSH access to a Linux server, and I issue the who command. And I see what IP addresses are connected to that, and then I somehow get booted off that system, and I start going through those IP addresses and going, oh, that person logged in from this IP address. If I nmap that IP address, I see there's an exposed Plex server sharing media, and maybe I don't even need to find an ODay. Maybe I just guess someone's password or what have you that gets me on their Plex server, and I pivot from there.
Or you have an out-of-date Plex server, which no one has. CVE, what is it? 2019 one something or other. Remote code execution.
That's possible.
Or that has the ability to get the remote code execution, and no one updates their Plex. So there's that. Or if we're going to talk nation state, like this could be pulled off by anybody. I am still not saying it's not nation state, that they're a viable target. They're a good company. They try and do the right things, but every company has devs, and they all do stupid shit.
Yep.
Like
and Tyler,
expose Plex servers to the internet.
Yeah, and honestly, I think Plex becomes a very interesting attack vector. When we started COVID, we started with a shift from home.
Yes,
like that is a great attack target to get some more technical, high value ish targets that run Plex servers at their home and they expose them to the world. Like that's a smart vector. It's a smart vector.
I have other questions here, and that is, why is this guy running the Plex server on his frickin' work computer. Oh wait, it's his own computer.
Right.
This is one of the 4 people in the world that have access to this really sensitive repository, and they're letting him do BYOD for access to it. Nobody's
Do you know how
talking
many
about
companies do
that.
BYOD?
If you need to, but
Hey, Mister, I work in a federal institution. Do you know how many companies let their people use BYOD? Do you know how many?
No, but hold on.
keeps me
But I'm
awake at night.
siding with Lee here. I think there's a risk analysis that has to take place based on the level of access that you have in your company. And most compliance standards are going to enforce some kind of role-based access control and ask you questions like, who has access to the most sensitive stuff, and do you let them be?
I have 2 questions for you, Paul.
But they don't.
Paul, I have 2 questions for you. Number one question: how many companies know where all their data is and how valuable that data is at any given time? Number one. That's first question. Second question is: how many companies on the small side have any idea what the word compliance means?
Well, that's a different. Second one's a different issue.
No. They're the same exact issue.
And the third question is, and the third question is Josh still fired up from yelling at dollhouses?
I think so.
But I mean, your whole LastPass was how they dumped those small companies.
Mm-hmm. So you talk about devs, and devs are smart. They have
no
the
devs
ability,
are dumbasses.
Well, they're intelligent technically, so they have the ability to set up something like Plex. They're going to be able to access and want to work on code, which they may not. We went through this at the work from home with the initial COVID thing. We've seen a target on Soho routers because people's houses were targeted. We've seen NAS, and then we've seen the stuff inside that are making the connections. If this is nation state, they're going to have flow data. They're going to be able to see who all is connecting into LastPass on specific internal IP space that is used for internal employees, and they can quickly see open ports. You can run that on Shodan all day. There's services that will give you this. Now, the problem I have is it's very targeted. However, it doesn't take long on LinkedIn to look this up. This has been a scenario we've done for multiple companies, and this is the exact scenario that we've tried to bring into scope executives' homes, executives' kids' networks, because the work from home is a hostile network. No one thinks of it that way. They take the MacBook home, they think it's fine. They take whatever else home, they think it's fine. We have, ZTNA, we're safe. That home network is the initial access that then allows them to hammer on something without all the SIM, all the alerts, and the corporate laptop is still going to be secure, but it provides a jump point. It is basically a tunnel into the corporate network, and we've proved this so many times that it has gotten to the point where I'm surprised this is the first company that we've seen a large. Oh wait, SolarWinds and never mind.
Whoops.
Well, I think securing the home network, I think is interesting, and maybe it's a topic we need to revisit. Especially as we look at this example and how there was stuff exposed to the internet. There's really no reason to expose stuff to the internet today. Now, those of us more technically advanced, we know how to configure VPNs. If you raise or lower the bar a little bit technically, there's some great solutions out there. Now, they are not a sponsor of the show, but I have to say I tested some Tailscale stuff. There's no reason at a certain technical level that you should ever have to expose a port, like in your home network, if you want to have access to things like your Plex server, right? Now, I did configure a certain aspect of that, and now it's not working, so I have to troubleshoot it. So now the bar kind of goes back up on that particular point. But when I first configured it, man, it was awesome. And it does this magic DNS thing, and it was literally magic. I was like, this is incredible. I can point it at their DNS server, and they know by subdomain, where to route that DNS request and response.
Which is definitely not enumerable by any stretch of the imagination.
Maybe I haven't tested that aspect of. Maybe Tyler, you and I need to tag team this to see just what the attack vectors would be. Because you're defending something slightly different now, right? Like you've kind of extended your network to this third party, and I get that. I still think it might be better than exposing ports directly, but I'm curious on your point, like how much more secure is this?
Oh, I mean, it's a reverse connection. So yeah, you're relying on someone else's network and their ability to not be enumerated, but those are those are accessible, and we've seen things with NAS, right? Like where you've got the cloud NAS and the application connection. Like, okay, so that's just an API call, and that's passing and forwarding that traffic through to your home network IP and making reverse connections to establish a session. Well, if you've got credentials or you have the ability to enumerate that, now you know an IP address, now you've got a target. There are a lot of ways to do this for a lot of different services. And so this is nothing new. This goes back, I mean, from a Plex standpoint, this would probably be pretty standard. Call it 2017 to 2020, that we didn't have all the easy ZTNA, Cloudflare, and OpenVPN on a consumer device unless you were a highly technical person running your own infrastructure, which most of these guys are very smart. They're devs, but they're also not infrastructure guys. That doesn't mean they didn't try and maybe mess up. But again, this is something that you go look at Shodan and you'll be very surprised how many good people and good things are still out there.
I want to take a deviation slightly from the more technical stuff because I did want to cover Section 230. And I want to put out what might be a bit kind of controversial.
What story?
My story number 25. It talks about 2 Supreme Court cases. The one in particular is Section 230. So Section 230 basically says, as a provider, I can't be held liable for bad things that might happen on my platform. So Google's basically in a court case that's gone to the Supreme Court where I believe parents of a victim of the terrorist attack in France are suing Google because YouTube puts videos out that were created by ISIS and recommend more videos by ISIS. And it's specifically that recommendation algorithm that's recommending further basically bad videos. Now, my take is somewhat simplistic. Basically, some people use hammers and they build beautiful homes, and some people use hammers to hurt people, but like don't sue the hammer company because people use hammers to do bad things. Well, I mean, and that is a grossly oversimplified.
And arguably to grossly oversimplify, this is some of the same thing that's happening here in the U.S. with some of the gun manufacturers. Mm-hmm. Guns are used in a crime.
I was going to say,
killed.
Why go hammer? Why not go straight to AR-15?
Yeah,
I was going simplistic and trying not to be overly controversial.
Guns are produced. You can be using them for good, for hunting and doing.
Why can't we be controversial?
And then the gun manufacturers are being sued because something that they produce was used by someone in a manner that was unethical.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the exact same debate about open source tooling.
Hammers are neutral. Just like guns could be neutral, but you have an opinion on that, so it looks eliminates.
Right. That's why I like the hammer. Yep. The hammer.
Well, how about open source tooling?
Well, are we talking claw hammer or ball peen hammer? Give me that at least.
Cross peen hammer. Very important. It's a cross peen hammer.
With the magnet.
That way it's a trans hammer. And now we've just triggered all of the conservatives. Anyway, so in all seriousness, what you've got is, you've got the exact same debate about open source tooling. If you've got an open source tool that is able to be used for good, I can test my environment, but you can also use it for bad. I mean, look at Cobalt Strike. Raf is a great guy. Okay, Raf Mudge is a great guy, but like correct versions of Cobalt Strike are everywhere now, right?
But
Tyler,
Josh,
how often do you run to them?
If I'm going to blame the crime on someone else, aren't I going to use a framing hammer?
Pudding bings.
Oh Jesus! Wait, where's my fucking stream deck?
He's here all week.
Where's your
2 shows on Thursday?
I don't have the sounds programmed in right now.
Try the fish, tip your waitress.
It's the veal. It's the fucking veal. Okay, but what the hell? Framing hammer. God damn.
But think about it. All right, let's think about Section 230 in the context of Discord. Does that mean if people say bad things in our Discord server that someone could sue Discord? And what does that mean for what the providers are now going to allow? And then you can say, well, what if we were to provide a platform? Well, if you revoke Section 230, there is no way that we're providing a platform to people have open communications if we could be held liable for what takes place on that platform. I think it's a really bad idea. And I'm not saying that like these companies should allow bad things to happen on their platform. In fact, companies like Google and others work very hard so that bad things don't happen and inappropriate content doesn't leak out on their platform. But like as it turns out, as those of us in technology know, that is super hard. But that doesn't mean they're not trying.
It's an interesting point. I want to Sorry, can I throw something at this really quickly? The stock market. Do you remember the crash that happened in, God, I forget what it was, but when they went 2008, yeah, when they had automated the trading but had not put in the circuit breakers, but because before that they could just shut off trading when they saw the trades, when the price is sliding and a crash happening. But when you put automation in, because humans can make problems, it takes computers to make them at scale and speed. Okay, so then they started putting automated circuit breakers in to shut it down automatically if things started going down. Well, my point here is that when YouTube has, 8 hours of content uploaded every second?
Oh my God.
There's no way they can go over all of that.
It's ridiculous how much content's uploaded to YouTube.
So, and every other site is this, every other major site is the same way. Can you imagine the amount of staff they'd have to go to hire to look at 8 hours of content every second, 24/7, by the way, to examine that and see if it's controversial in any way, shape, or form?
I think there was a study or something, like there's legitimately not enough people in the world to be able to put eyeballs on all of the content at YouTube. Like, I don't know if maybe there's enough, but like it's pretty close. In other words, that's how much content is uploaded to YouTube every minute.
And again, like, are we going to have a free internet? Are we going to have innovation and the ability to create a product and not be so worried about litigation?
Right.
Like, this comes back to litigation and all of these sue happy people and people that want to blame someone other than the people doing the bad things. That doesn't end well. It just causes monopolies to take over and people to be scared of doing innovation and having innovation stay in a garage and not get pushed out to the general populace. So that means code, that means ideas, that means everything down to manufacturing and inventing. So I think this never ends well for anybody. This is pretty fundamental from history. So I don't see how this is a good thing. And as soon as we start passing laws again, now we're bringing federal government and government regulations and money and lobbyists behind all of this, that just adds another layer of complexity that we really just don't need. The gun manufacturers don't need it. Open source offensive tools don't need it. Like,
hammer makers don't need it.
I can't think of a good place that this is actually going to provide some good. Like, it's not going to bring people's dead daughter back. It's not going to stop the next terrorist. It's not going to impede the attackers from doing what they're doing. This doesn't do anything.
So what I hear you saying, Tyler, is it's going to happen.
Probably.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
No, apparently not. From what I've heard about the Supreme Court's arguments, they really seem quite persuaded by this, that they cannot understand what the consequences would be of blocking 230, and they're probably not going to do it. They said it should go back to Congress, where they can really have this discussion and try to pass a law specific to it.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that's will never happen. So, or at least really slow the process down at that point.
Hey,
So the Supreme Court will be open-minded as to whether Santa Claus exists. Okay.
So speaking of passing laws, if we can transition a little bit, my story number one, make companies liable for software security. An article from the Washington Post. It's basically a respin from some stuff we saw in 2002 by Schneier. This time from Jen Easterly, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency Director, effectively for some federal adoption here in the U.S. With some push from CISA to have companies required to have stuff be released to have them secure by design and secure by default.
What does that mean, though?
Like,
everyone has to be secure by design and secure by default. Oh, okay. What does that mean? Who holds the stamp that says secure by design?
There's no I/O. There's no on/off switch.
It's buried in green.
There's no data in. There's no data out, because that could be insecure.
Yep.
We're starting at the executive level. We're pulling the big lever that says this needs to be designed securely, secure by design. Now, all you guys figure this out. We've not been doing this for 30 or 40 or 50 years. So now you should figure it out. That's what they're saying.
Yep.
I mean, it makes sense from a critical infrastructure standpoint, and I don't think any company by default, if you're in critical infrastructure, providing things that are actually critical, like power grid, PLCs, nuclear, water, waste treatment, I think by design, they're naturally thinking about security. That doesn't mean that they thought about it 10 years ago and it's still not in place. But secure by design for critical infrastructure, I think everyone is worried about security now, so new things are getting made that way anyway. If you're a good, now IoT is completely different, right? Like that's
IoT is not OT, right?
Thing. Correct. That's a minimal viable security for cost on chip, and with inside of a given release date. That's all that.
Yeah,
is.
There's an important thing we need to talk about really quickly. Tyler, can you say the word for the type of energy station that is not coal or oil? Please.
Nuclear?
Renewable.
That's the one.
Thank you.
Not nuclear? Nuclear?
We're just laughing at you, Tyler.
Nuclear.
Is that Idaho? I said
it's not nuclear. Nuclear.
Where are the nuclear
when you guys say it now, it all sounds the same. Now it's all blurring together, and it all sounds the same, and I can't tell the difference of what you're saying.
It's just
I know what you're talking about. I think it was
Atomic.
It was Bush
Atomic.
Jr. It was Bush Jr. that made
GW,
that.
baby.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
It's a southern accent thing, I guess.
So
Midwestern.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. I totally apologize, Tyler. I'm an ass.
So stepping back a little bit, I think the big point of this one for me was that it becomes about liability. Like, you need to make sure your shit's secure, or those folks that are affected by compromise of your now insecure platform have a right to sue you because of it. And
that goes back to our previous one, right?
Exactly.
Right?
And Tyler, back to your comments about innovation. Like, if I release software, whether I'm getting paid for it or not, and someone gets compromised it as a result, and they now have a right to sue me because it wasn't secure by design. Well,
maybe ChatGPT AI should write all of this law and legislation and guidance, because I'm just hearing big words that don't go anywhere.
Yeah,
correct.
Wasn't this the same session where she was talking about stop using the consumer as a crash test dummy?
Probably.
That's someone that doesn't understand software. I mean, anyone that's created software in their life, and specifically, even narrow it down, if you produce software that is consumed by other third parties, right, in like a process, you always get to a point where you're like, we're going to ship the code. Like, at some point, we have to ship the code, and whether you verbalize it outright or in the back of your mind, you're like, well, the users, if they break it or come across a bug, like, we'll fix it then. Like, that's just the nature of software. It's gonna get field. It's gonna get field. I guess any product, right, is gonna get field tested. It doesn't matter. You can go on Shark Tank and be producing any kind of product you want. The end consumer is gonna ultimately do some level of field testing. That's just the nature of putting any kind of product into the market.
They find issues.
When browsers first came out and the World Wide Web was a new thing, I mean, everything came out in beta, and it was like common knowledge.
You were part of the testing.
It's new. Have at it. Let us know what's wrong with it.
It's like every new Google product.
Every new Google product.
Nowadays we have bug bounties. I have a client I was talking to today. They have what I thought was kind of a clever name for their bug bounty program. It's called Responsible Vulnerability Disclosure.
Ooh, don't. You're about to ignite a flame war. Jeff, I do have a question for you. How was it back when rocks were soft and dirt was young?
Oh my God!
Wow,
awesome.
I mean, to the extent that this is not wrong. Like, yes, the consumer shouldn't be the test bed, but let's step back again. And we're a capitalist nation. If we're going to have consumerism and we want the lowest cost, the consumer is what drives the market. Consumers are not going to be concerned about being the test bed. They're concerned about the bottom dollar and the feature set. So, well, what she says is logical. That doesn't compute to making a profit and being capitalistic in building a business, an economy for a country that then has to sustain and create taxes and now has protection and builds a military. All the things that we rely on in order to be a good country and do good things in the world, we're taking that away by simply trying to remove the consumerism in order to get to a more secure product that then makes a country more insecure. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but secure is also a state in time. It's a period in time. You could deliver the most secure product in the world, whatever it is, to a consumer, and then tomorrow, one of our cohorts and friends goes, "Oh, there's a big heinous vulnerability in it. Now it's not secure anymore."
Yep.
I went around.
There's another piece that seems to be lost too.
What security meant. Go ahead, Lee. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say they used an analogy for physical testing, the crash test dummy. They use the crash test dummy for the life safety part of a vehicle development. They're not using it. They're not using that degree of rigor on the electronics in the vehicle. Look at all the vehicle hacking stuff. It's not the best analogy.
Great point, Lee. There's different aspects to security, for sure.
Right. Well, they stuck an infotainment sensor in the cars. Even ignoring the electronics or the electrical system, Lee, your analogy is fantastic. Look at they grafted it, they bolted on an infotainment system and went, yay, let's connect every car to the internet and not think about it. Isn't that a great idea?
I don't have to think, I'll take two.
And the fact that we can patch software or we can patch a vulnerability, that's an ongoing iterative approach, whereas something like a brake pad with a flawed bolt pattern or something like that takes a much bigger effort to replace all those. So by design, the secure code or a chip being secured or procured from a secure supply chain, that's completely different from designing it and building secure code that runs on top of it that can be patched.
Someone suggested this in a webinar. I thought it was interesting to think about. And I think in certain circumstances in technology, it's not a horrible idea, and it would be based on implementation. But on the consumer side, let's take your home firewall router and go, hey, there's a recall. Physically remove your router and go take it back to the dealer. Where is that? Is that Best Buy? So you can do a recall on it. That's not how stuff works.
Internet's going to go down.
I totally want Geek Squad to do that, and I'm sure that Geek Squad's not compromised and flashing bad firmware on there as they're doing these recalls. This is a never-ending cat and mouse game.
I drop USBs at Best Buy all the time. They always give them back to me because I put my name inside of them.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Yes. I forget what I was going to say when I let Lee go ahead of me because we were talking at the same time. But I'm not convinced that the crash dummy reference is an analogy. I think it might be a metaphor. Just saying.
Okay.
But I think it's an aspect, right? It's one aspect of safety in a vehicle, how it performs in a crash.
But what is her intention?
Yeah, but I think maybe it was a comparison. I think they were trying to say crash dummies have been used for automobiles have been around for what now? 110 years, 115 years. When was the first crash dummy invented? It was an automation. It was an innovation to test for physical safety for a vehicle, and I think they were looking more for an equivalent. Maybe that is the definition of an analogy, or I don't know, but I don't think they were extending it to thinking about the software that's in a car or the technology that's in a car beyond the motor running and doors and windows and frames buckling and stuff like that.
Yeah, stop using the consumer as a punching bag. Stop using them as the place that vulnerabilities get tested and pushed out. It makes sense from an intention standpoint, but again, that is the intent of all places now that have at least a semi-decent leadership and or security program that is trying to do something in the world today. Is let's all be more secure. Let's get to a more secure place. Let's not intentionally make this insecure. Again, you have to take into business risk, cost of making it secure, and cost of production and ownership for the lifetime of the product. What she's saying, the intent is great. That's not going to apply and move outside into anything that companies aren't already doing. It's almost empty words. And I love Jen, and I love what she's doing.
Tyler, you reminded me of what I was going to say. I pre-COVID, I ran around at some conferences for a while, asking people to define what is security, and it was amazing how difficult it was for people to answer that question. But we talk about something being secure. I don't know if there's universal agreement on what that is. The best response I heard from someone was that being secure or security is an emotion.
Wow. Sam's reaction on that was priceless.
And what was that?
That's a mighty strange thing to say.
That is a very strange thing to say.
Speaking of deeming things secure, and I think one thing that makes us cringe on that is the innovation that happens in attacks that we talk about every week. In my story number 3 is exploits explained using APIs to execute a server-side request forgery. And the title doesn't really do it justice. So essentially what happens is this person found a 6-year-old GitHub repository that has a tool that allows you to create a malicious AVI movie file that you then upload to an application that is part of the application that allows a user to upload movie files. But there's a malicious HLS playlist, which I didn't dig into exactly what that particular functionality was. And it says if the backend processes stuff with FFmpeg, FFmpeg will concatenate all the segments and process it as a single file. It then tries to show a screen capture of the TTY printing of this file. And so using that functionality, essentially, you upload a malicious movie file, and then what you get back after it was processed is another movie file that's been processed by FFmpeg.
Which is the TTY printing of
any arbitrary file on the file system, like Etsy password. And so there's a screen cap, basically, of Etsy password in the resulting movie file. I was like, that's... Like, even to think about that as server-side request forgery is kind of interesting. I feel like that's almost a subclass in server-side request forgery, not how I would typically categorize server-side request forgery. But I thought that was super cool and also relevant to my interest because I may or may not have coded an application that accepts a movie file as input and uses FFmpeg to process it in the back end.
I love this. This is the true definition. This is what is in the creativity side of a lot of hacking that used to be just novel and thinking outside the box. Someone abusing the real functionality to get to something that they're not supposed to get to. Like, this is what we were doing for decades, and it got less creative and much more flashy news, actor APT emulation BS that is just not cool anymore. It's just dumb.
What were you going to say, Josh? Is that application we know and we love and use every week vulnerable to this? I'm not sure yet.
Well, no, actually they're asking for the GitHub link in Discord. So they're asking for the link to that.
Yes, it's great. It'll get tested one way or the other.
Which one? With GitHub link to which?
The AVI.
Yeah. So this article is from Synac, actually. And like chronicles the vulnerability and exploit, and it's in this article. After they enumerated a certain functionality within the application, they said, "Oh, like I kind of need a tool that creates a malicious video," and they found this tool from GitHub, which is the link that
I just posted to Discord.
Yeah, posted in Discord, and it's basically a Python script that was written 6 years ago. And I haven't parsed through, like in the GitHub repository, which is also interesting. They're like, there's a section to go how it works, and it's just labeled TBD. And that was 6 years ago. So you got to basically read through the code and figure out how it does. And I haven't done that yet. But it's 150 lines of Python, which is crazy. I love it.
I think my story number 4 is a similar kind of thing where you have the Cisco AnyConnect, and you can just make a fake Cisco server that will then run arbitrary code on the client.
I've heard of this attack before. I feel like this has been an attack we've talked about before.
Could have been, yeah. But it's got a script that runs on the connector, a script that runs on disconnect, and it gets that from the server. So it sounds pretty hard to prevent.
You just need to get someone to actually connect to your AnyConnect server as opposed to the legitimate one.
But typically when that happens, there's usually some kind of a key, right, that authenticates client and server.
Right. Well, I mean, I could see, hey, do you want to join my Plex server? You need VPN access.
That's right. You won't know. But I mean, your client won't refuse to connect to a server it doesn't know. You'll just fail to authenticate later.
Right.
But you're overthrown.
I see. Yeah. That's valid. And very appropriate to the name, AnyConnect.
Well, that's why they say the only defense would be to do something like a firewall rule that only lets people reach your allowed server, which is kind of contradicting the whole point of the thing.
Right. That would be specific connect, not AnyConnect.
Well, that's just good security. That's what ZTNA is supposed to solve, is the authorized device and the authorized connection from the authorized process with the right user during the proper hours, like all of the validation to get to the point where you have conditional access inbound and the allow happens. Like otherwise, like this is the age-old problem that's going to continue to happen. So I guess we keep going.
Yeah. There were some cool Burp plugins.
Yeah.
One was the Burp DOM scanner. So was this?
Sure.
Now I'm getting them confused. Yeah. So the DOM scanner is just that recursive crawling and scanning of single page applications. It runs a Chromium browser that scans the web page for DOM-based cross-site scripting. I was hesitant when I got to the part where it said it requires Node and DOM dig in order to work, but I thought that was pretty cool. I think the more interesting one was the semgrep one. So semgrep is the source code analysis tool that looks for vulnerabilities. And what story was that? There's a Burp plugin that can take YAML files, right, that are associated with semgrep. So you got semgrep and you go, I want to look at JavaScript code for these particular vulnerabilities. Has a YAML file that describes how to do that. You can take those YAML files now and with this plugin import them into Burp. So as you're passively visiting the website, you're downloading the JavaScript from that website. It's going off to semgrep, which has a YAML file that is a semgrep description of how to discover those vulnerabilities in the actual code. I was like, oh, that is actually really cool.
Yeah.
Semgrep one is one I really want to, that's on my list to test for sure.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. That is my story number 18.
Eris routers being vulnerable is a little bit spooky.
Well, yeah, because that's Latin America. That's like the
That is America. That is most cable companies. Think of Sparklight, Cable One, even Comcast has some Eris routers.
That was the authenticated.
I believe there was the authenticated one, right, for RCE though, and it's got a proof of concept for it,
which was ridiculously easy. I'm trying to find where that was in my stories. Where was that?
Yeah, it was modifying the characters, right? Like where you're swapping the input with a $$ or slash.
Oh yeah, it was a gaffed input validation.
Yeah.
But it's authenticated, but most of the Eris routers that are provided by your internet provider typically have a default username and password, and sometimes that's not often here in the U.S., but it's used in a lot of other countries as well. Back in the day, I remember, I think I was presenting at BrewCon, and I talked about how you can go to specific countries, enumerate their ISPs, what are their ISPs distributing as routers. You can get a lot of that from Shodan, find a vulnerability in that particular router, and basically take over a country, right? If that's the most popular ISP. I mean, this was back in the day too. There's a lot more infrastructure out there today. But the constant is that firmware-based devices will always be vulnerable. We talk about how we've made it economically like more expensive for someone to find a 0-day vulnerability and write an exploit for it. Typically, it's a chained set of vulnerabilities in more popular software from larger software providers like Apple and Google and Microsoft. So it's more expensive now for an attacker to go, I want a 0-day for Microsoft Windows. That takes 6 months to a year just to get one, and it's got a limited time frame and shelf life essentially after you spend that investment. And once you start using it, clock starts ticking, someone's going to find it, and eventually that's going to get patched. Now you flip over to firmware, your bar is much, much lower. However, your targets in target types are much more ubiquitous and diverse, right? Ours is just one particular case, and there was another one. Where is that?
You think about
while you're looking, Paul, I want to ask a question of our esteemed panel here. If something is too expensive to be worth attempting to exploit, it's too costly, it's not worth it, even though there's some glaring vulnerability, does that mean it's secure?
Define too expensive. No. To whom?
I would say maybe, actually.
I would say yes.
Maybe.
That's what threat modeling is. Secure means you have an acceptable level of risk given your threat modeling.
Yep.
Ah, somebody took a stab at defining security. That's good. I like it. Something to do with risk and an acceptable level of risk.
All depends on your definition of what is.
Yeah, I mean, like you look at something like taking over a satellite distribution network via mesh by launching your own satellite to inject yourself and have code between that. Like that's going to be outside the realm of cost. Therefore, the risk and probability, because security is based on risk versus probability versus time that it's going to be deployed and exposure, right? You could have something that's vulnerable that's not exposed and there's mitigating, compensating control, so therefore it's secure. So all of those factors have to come into play in order to evaluate the overall risk for security as a whole.
So what I hear you saying, Tyler, is that the idea of being secure is could be translated to an acceptable level of risk.
Yeah, because as part of that risk evaluation, right? You're taking.
There's no right or wrong answers here. I'm just trying to probe and dig deeper and get beyond. Since nobody liked that security is an emotion.
Well, in retrospect, I think you're right, because I remember the formal definition of security I learned is it's the state of well-being where you have levels of risk that are low enough that you can accomplish your goals. If you're a company, you can still make your product and make enough money, and if you're an individual, you can still live a life sufficiently free of disasters and obstructions. It is just basically a feeling that the security problems are small enough that they are not greatly harming your life. It's very much like physical health. I mean, physical health is also hard to define. It just means you don't have so many medical problems that they're ruining your life.
Still breathing. I remembered, I have to give proper credit. It was Chris Nickerson that told me that security is an emotion. So
but it's more than a feeling. Kind of like
we have to be more feeling, right? Because that's qualitative versus quantitative, and that the whole premise of our ability to get to a quantitative state so that we can evaluate that risk appropriately and do analysis. That's our job as technicians, as practitioners, is to evaluate that. That cannot be that can't be qualitative. That can't be a feeling. That can't be something that we have a gut on. Like, we can have some experience and intuition that you can add into that equation, but you have to be quantitative in order to provide a metric that gives proper visibility into the business risk or associated risk of any given thing. That can be medical or whatever. Without the data.
Tyler, on that I have a question for you, because I kind of go with the idea that, like, courage is perhaps not quantifiable, but I go with the idea that it's the feeling of being equal to whatever is going to come at you. So now that security to me would be kind of the same thing, is that you have the overall sense and you'll back that up with metrics and what you're seeing, that you're overall secure at whatever is going to come at you. And
you can feel however you want. And I think that's an interesting analogy, but being courageous does not necessarily mean you're going to do something with courage when the event happens, because you don't have the metrics to back it up and the history of analytics to show that you have done courageous things. Now, if you get the metrics and you can then tie that to it, then it's a quantitative metric. It's not a feeling. You can feel courageous all day. Someone points a gun at your head, I guarantee that courage dissipates. Now, unless you've done that many times and you had guns pointed at your head and reacted, then you have metrics and history behind that to show that you're capable of doing those things based on a quantitative result and experiment, right?
I'm not feeling very courageous about bank security. Just throwing this out there.
My voice is my passport.
My number 7?
My story number 15. Do we have the same story, Lee? How I broke into a bank account with an AI-generated voice?
Now, mine's that just the number of banking Trojan is like up a huge chunk. Let's talk about your 15.
So they used an AI-powered replica of their voice to break into their bank account. So it was an So I can't believe that this exists. There's automated systems that if you call it up, it'll validate that you are you based on your voice fingerprint. And I'm like, this may have worked maybe when in the movie Sneakers, right? But even in the movie Sneakers, as we so fondly remember,
which
right?
Movie? What?
The movie Sneakers, as we fondly remember,
the best
Jeff,
hacker movie? Okay.
the second best hacker movie, we fondly remember that it was defeated in that movie with a recording, right? It's very famously in them. It's one of my favorite things about that movie, Jeff, is how they defeated the voice finger printing. But
the temperature detection, the motion detection.
Yeah. The voice was awesome because she had to go on the date and make him say certain words, and it was well written. There was an entertainment value from it, as well as a good security lesson that fast forward to today apparently haven't learned, because the banks are saying, no, this is secure, that we can validate people based on their voice. And I'm like, no, with machine learning, you cannot validate people on your voice. There is no way. This is not a valid security mechanism.
I mean,
like, just make it stop.
I literally saw a story today about someone who went and did a deep fake of Obi-Wan explaining to Luke about his actual interactions with Boba Fett, and it was all deepfake.
Yeah. So, but podcasters have done this, not even with a large data set. I mean, Larry and I think about how many hours of our voice are available on the internet, and all podcasters, not just us, all podcasters. I mean, a lot of people, but let's just take podcasters as an example. I've listened to other podcasts where they've AI generated, or the listener like AI generated them saying stuff, and I'm like, that's, even to the human ear, I'm like, that's pretty believable. Put that up against a system that's trying to validate. I'm like, this is not a security mechanism. This should be outlawed. Banks should not be able to validate. I think there should be, here I go, proposing legislation, right?
Make it secure by design. Don't do this.
Legislation that makes sense is good legislation, all right? And a lot of legislation that doesn't make sense, and we covered that when we talked about Section 230. But in this case, I think compliance, a law that says you cannot validate users based on their voice. I believe there's enough research to prove that it is not a valid mechanism for identifying a person who and allowing them to say who they say they are. Would you agree?
Are you saying that something you are is not a valid authentication factor, or just voice?
Just voice.
Just
a voice fingerprint is not sufficient enough to validate a person's identity
anymore.
Well,
I think that the risk profile for voice validation is different in 2023 than back when in the mid 70s, where we had an alarm system with the voice recognition. You had to read a particular set of phrases and you would pass if your voice print matched. But there wasn't all the AI available to cause to create phony voices like there is today.
Yep.
The deep fakes, as you were.
Face has been used for a while, right? Like I broke several libraries used by many very large companies for securing very secure platforms with the Face ID stuff. And up until they started to go to infrared and depth perception, that shouldn't have been used. That was very easily defeatable in some very good ways. So videos and the authenticity of those videos, we've gotten to the same place, I would say even 5 years ago. Like, you had to be very careful with good video editing software, CGI. All of the things could lead to a video being faked very easily, sometimes detectable, sometimes not. The voice is no different than that. I think we've got to think a little bit further ahead. Same with biometrics. We've gotten to that point where we don't think that that's going to last very long either. So, like, it is us as a means of a token with all of the computer and fake generated stuff, is that even something that should be considered in all aspects? Look at facial recognition, fingerprints, DNA, like, all of these things can be obtained very easily or spoofed, and once you have them, they don't change. Like, my face doesn't change, my voice doesn't change, my DNA and fingerprint.
Yeah, but your voice, if you have a cold, your voice changes, and you wonder how the algorithm treats that. Does it accept or deny in that particular case? And if it accepts, is it too loosey goosey with the authentication?
Yep. Yeah, there's an error means variable error rate that is acceptable in order to grease the skids for user adaptation and acceptance, so it doesn't frustrate end users. So they build in insecurity so that it works with a high probability of success. So this is probably going to end poorly for all of these things. We should just not use any of them. Don't use iris scans. Like, all of these points in time data that you can't change as a person should not be stored in a database somewhere and should not be able to be used as an authentication method, period. That's my two takes.
Well, they might do as the second factor in two-factor authentication.
True, but if it's something that can be spoofed readily, does that make it two-factor still, or does that mean that now you are relying on that sole factor because the other one can be spoofed?
Well, there's a failure rate at everything. I mean, if you have a USB key, then there's a possible way to steal it or duplicate it. It's just, that's why you don't trust it completely, but it's as good as a password.
Mm-hmm. But isn't the whole idea of two-factor authentication, is it a geometric or an gosh, I shouldn't have gone down the math route. Exponential expression to to have two forms versus one. Two is better than one, even though any one of them individually can be defeated, and there's problems with any of them.
I agree, Jeff. Right. I'm behind the using the voice as one of the metrics or telemetry that you collect. And this, when we talk about zero trust, right? Zero trust is a bunch of, we did a panel on this, right? It's a bunch of things that we've already talked about and practiced in security, hopefully, like system hardening and principle of least privilege. The overlay for zero trust is to collect multiple points of telemetry and use that to determine a level of trust. So in the bank example, it's not just my voice, but I'm calling from a number that's on file with them, and maybe I have a PIN number that I also have to enter. So those three things combined is a much higher accuracy rating that Paul is Paul, for example. What I'm saying is banks shouldn't be able to just use one of those easily spoofable mechanisms for authentication, such as someone's voice, in order to validate that for transferring money. Maybe you do that for like to get to a maybe you do that to get to a person.
What's your mother's maiden name?
Right, exactly. So there's other points of trust.
Well,
but also zero trust says based on those points, what level of access should that person have as they move through the system? If it was only validated on voice, maybe I don't have access to any account information, but like I can ask a question to get to like the next level. They have to check the phone number, the PIN number, mother's maiden name, social security number, all the other any other points that would identify you as a person.
Well, this is conditional access, right? This heuristics telemetry for conditional access to then do the authentication. That's separate than the authentication.
Right. That's what we lovingly refer to as part of zero trust.
But I think what we haven't talked about, and we don't need to now, but I'll just throw it out there, is we're talking about all the things that could go wrong, all the problems, all the imperfections. But I think what drives the day more than anything, and I don't think you guys will disagree with me, but feel free to, is not all the things that could go wrong with it and all the ways it could be exploited. It's what if all the problems that the legitimate user has in trying to make it work, and what happens? It is my voice, and for some reason, like somebody mentioned, you have a cold and it's not picking up on it. I think the convenience factor of all of these factors of authentication are trump any other thing that we've been discussing ultimately. Agree? Disagree?
No,
I completely. And again, we're building that insecurity in there for the convenience and adaptation of the user in order to provide successful and seamless use cases, so that the brand and the product and the uses by the general consumer is smooth and works just fine. So we're building the tolerance in there so that there is a level of error and successful even though it's unsuccessful. That's built into most products for convenience.
I want to go back to firmware for a moment. There was an article I saw, The Complexities and Demands of Creating Firmware for the World's Most Critical Systems, and it talks at a very high level about firmware creation. But in the security section, it says, meeting security requirements requires careful design and implementation of the firmware, including the use of secure communication protocols, encryption, and access control mechanisms. Developers must also consider the threat landscape, including the potential for cyber attacks, and design the firmware to mitigate these threats. That sounds like something that ChatGPT wrote. I'm just saying, I hate to pick on the author. I think they had to write a security section, and it sounds like they just went to ChatGPT and said, this is what you need to do, secure firmware. And I mean, the unfortunate thing is it came across our eyeballs, and we've talked ad nauseum about firmware security
and ChatGPT
and Larry and I both work for firmware security-based companies, so we understand this problem. I mean, we work in it every day, so it's a very, very high-level statement using very generic terms, which is what I feel like you get when you ask ChatGPT to describe something.
Yeah. You want to talk about my number 9?
Mm-hmm. I do.
Actually, this would be a good one with Dr. Doug on board.
Dr. Doug.
What is number 9?
Basically, what this one's about is as we move to more remote in the education system, more cheating's happening on tests, is becoming worse, and then you get ChatGPT writing people's papers. Apparently, there's a gentleman out there who actually wrote code that can detect a ChatGPT written document, making him the most hated man on campus because he's running everybody's paper through it.
Mm-hmm.
But also part of it is I'm hearing that non-tenured staff teaching classes, issuing grades, they won't raise a red flag on any students because if they get the students, they'll give them a bad review and they'll get fired.
Ooh.
Well, that's good. We actually discussed it on BSW this week. This was the whole thing on ChatGPT.
Here's the whole thing. If a teacher can talk to a student and ask them questions without a computer in front of them, you can detect cheating. That's the best way to do. Like, hey, you wrote this great paper. I want you to come in my office. I want you to, or in front of the class. Like, can you describe it?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the unpopular stance on this. Just like at one point we could all do math on paper, and the calculator came about, and then we ended up with a smart calculator, and then we ended up with a computer, the ability to do the math and cheat through that. And then the cell phone is readily available computer in the pocket that can cheat on all things. Now, does that not lead to more effective learning to learn and the ability to innovate past these stupid things that you don't need to remember? And we should be adapting our education system to advance quicker through the ranks of things that are meaningless because you can look them up and have someone do that. Or does this lend itself to the lack of creative thinking because no one can think on their own, and therefore every piece of content that's getting released on the internet now has a very similar tone, and nothing innovative or creative is happening because of those things on the sounding?
I think there's a lot of analogies we can draw, right? Because we've always had throughout history tools that have evolved, and it doesn't replace knowledge and understanding of a craft or a trade or a particular field of expertise. You increasingly, as time goes on, you have better tools. And I truly believe that you should learn how to use the fundamental tools and then use some of the more advanced ones. I think that's an interesting teaching approach. Like woodworking is a pretty good example, right? You can create all kinds of jigs and use advanced saws and all that stuff. Larry, I know you do woodworking, right? Mm-hmm. Like a great way to learn woodworking is take it back to basics, use some hand tools. So you understand the fundamentals, then you can start using more advanced tools. I think it's the same thing in technology, math, and calculators. Like those are just tools at our disposal. And Tyler, also what you made me think of is that I run across papers that are trying to describe the math behind a lot of these encryption protocols. I have no idea what they're talking. You could give me all the calculators, ChatGPT in the world. I'm not going to understand that stuff unless I've studied it, and probably unless I've had a mentor or an instructor or a teacher that has kind of instilled upon me their wisdom and taught me. So I don't think it replaces.
Does that go back to the fact that you don't need to know those things in order to understand enough in order to use the tools to get to the results in which you need? So therefore, the only people that need to know the things at that level are those that have to get that deep in order to get to the next level of depth, in order to come up with the next innovation and creativity. So should we be readapting and rechanging our children to be able to utilize tools rather than teaching them some of the fundamentals that are archaic and are offering very little value in their life?
No, I think they need to do the fundamentals. And I think we should also. I think we need to do both.
Value? Is that what you said, Tyler?
No, I think we need to do both. You need to learn the fundamentals, and you need to learn how to use the advanced tools. And I think you can be better with the advanced tools. I mean, there's tons of analogies on this. Like, my wife had to build an X-ray machine when she was in X-ray school, right? We see it in our field as well. We're like, you got to build a network. You got to build.
How do they do that now when there's no Radio Shack?
I don't know, Jeff. They
order from Amazon.
Buy stuff from Amazon, I guess.
And I'm more of the old school and more of the come up in the ranks, do the hard grit work, learn the fundamentals so that you know all the things so you can be better at this. However, I've been pushing myself to try and think a little bit like, is that the best use case for the day and age, time, and the world advancements that we're placing our children in for the next 2 decades? Like,
it's got to be context based, Tyler. It's Tyler, not just
Tyler,
do they need to.
Wax on, wax
we don't
off.
Teach kids how to push things in and out of registers and stuff, and work in machine language. We teach them. We take them up and put them in Golang or other places. We're not at that low level. But if I'm teaching a class that basically I'm teaching you how to build a microprocessor, and the final is to build a working 4-bit processor, you're not going to, I'm not expecting you'll get a design offline. And, well, I guess you could get your own design. You still got to implement it. Point is, it's got to be the right, it's got to reflect the content of the class. Calculus 1, probably you got to show how you do the work if you still need Calculus 1.
See, I would take something like that, and then I would think the opposite way of that, right? Like, so, okay, I want you to design that microprocessor. Now, what if someone did that, leveraging something like ChatGPT? They came up with a model, saved a bunch of time, and on top of that, because they saved that time, they were able to creatively design the business process, a secure SDLC pipeline, and then implement a business requirement design to pitch with a pitch deck to a business line in order to get the processor put into production. Now they've got all that extra time, and they're building different skills within inside of that. Does that make that a worthwhile use of an advanced tool that they otherwise don't need to know?
I'd want them to demonstrate that they had the knowledge to do this. They didn't just go get somebody's final answer, that they actually knew how to put those things together, where to come up with it, what they did, what was behind it. It's the old analogy to, in a science project, did your parents help? You've got to do some of the work yourself. I'm not saying skip the tools, but you've got to understand, come up with your own approach.
So we need to be balanced. Again, I'm still on your side.
In a writing class, you're teaching kids how to write. You have them use GPT to do it. You haven't taught them how to write.
I still agree with you.
But they don't need to use a pen. They can use a computer and have it printed on a printer.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with you. I'm still trying to push myself a little bit further. So I was curious.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in 100% disagreement with you, Tyler. I'm just refining the point.
Larry,
I think it's got to be the right in the right context. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of low-level stuff we don't use, and we've got really brilliant people that know how to take the tools and run with them.
Larry, you had something from Nicholas Spark. I wanted to get your take on that.
The what now?
The U-boot HTTP client. I think we talked about this before, and I referenced some of Nicholas's other posts. He had one that was basically he disassembled some firmware and found 21 command injection vulnerabilities. Back to our point that we still do not secure firmware to the level it needs to be secured. And we covered this U-boot HTTP client. I want to get your take on it, given your coursework and day job. It speaks to your interests.
Yeah, and coming up completely unprepared, I put this one in. I was one of those things I needed to go back and read, but you're right. I think it's kind of terrifying when we start talking about many of the Linux-based distributions for IoT stuff using U-boot and how ubiquitous it's largely become, and at that level, to have that many vulnerabilities available as part of something so simple for remote booting, that it does not inspire confidence in the future.
No. Well, and this was the ability of U-boot to basically pull down any file.
Yeah.
And there was a vulnerability that Nicholas found in it. I don't remember all the details, but it's why Larry and I work in the field, because it's just
job security.
Oh God, it's still really. I gave a webinar with a couple of my coworkers this week on BMCs, and ironically, I was talking to a guest coming up on the show who also spoke a few years ago about BMCs. And like, has anything gotten much better on this front? He's like, no. I'm like, that's kind of my assessment too, right? And
you're fast becoming a curmudgeon, Paul.
I know. It pains me that we still have to talk about how heinous these vulnerabilities are with specifically firmware as a generic term. It really does. I mean, it's why we still talk about it, because the problem just doesn't get better. I don't know how to. If I knew how to fix it, I would have already been down that path.
Exactly, and you wouldn't be talking to us now.
I mean, I could fix it. We could collectively get together and write firmware that's like really awesomely, secure. The problem is we've got thousands of different hardware platforms, thousands of different firmware implementations, thousands of different different devices out there that just creates this really ripe and vulnerable landscape.
Yep. And I think that's kind of interesting. Oh crap! I forget which book I'm listening to on the way over here. And just as I was pulling into the studio, I am listening to Tracers in the Dark.
I've heard of that before. I knew that.
It is Tracers in the Dark by Andy Greenberg.
Yes.
It's about the cryptocurrency.
The Dolly Parton song, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But one of the concepts that was basically coming up, and I forget who it was attributed to. You said, "Oh, well, we could write this amazingly secure firmware, and but we'd have to deal with all these other things." And the concept was around cryptography and that type of stuff. And Jeff will appreciate this one. It's like anybody can write secure cryptographic algorithms that they can examine and can't find any issue with.
Right.
But when you present that to someone else, they can come up with a whole bunch of ideas about how to break it and break it.
Yeah.
So it's very much a myopic view of how we could do some of that stuff. Yeah.
Did you just make the argument for peer review?
I did.
Okay.
I did. And WPA2 did that. They had peer review. They had a 5-year peer review process for WPA2 with Wi-Fi, and guess what?
Still has vulnerabilities. Well, it goes back to the shattered notion that given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. We've proven that not true.
Right. Right. I mean, it's great in theory, but you got to have enough eyeballs.
But we know this.
Just so long as my 10,000 monkeys with typewriters can recreate the great works, I'm fine.
But we know the space of firmware security is particularly lagging behind on a lot of protections that modern operating systems and applications benefit from. Doesn't seem to be there. We established that it could be 6 months to a year to find a 0-day exploit in a well-funded major piece of software that comes from Apple, Microsoft, Google, right? Sure. I'm not saying that's true across the board, but as a generalization, folks that are very close to this issue, security researchers that find 0-day vulnerabilities and develop exploits for them, have said, yes, this is definitely a trend. It's definitely, making it more expensive to find these vulnerabilities. So it's not just me talking; it's others as well. Yeah. And that, when I think about that, I'm like, that isn't the case with a lot of firmware-based systems. Right. I mean, it's just not. And I want to see it get to that.
And that said, to temper some of that argument a little bit, Paul, I think there are some industries. If we talk about folks that are developing stuff within the last 3 years, there are some industries that do significantly better job of doing those protections, making sure that their stuff is secure. Mm-hmm. And there are other industries that, like, wow, you send this to offshore, coding, and they're going to reuse something that came from, Stack Overflow, and it's not secure. And there's very much a wide breadth of some of that. I mean, even thinking about some of the memory protections like DEP ASLR and some of that type of stuff. There are folks doing that on firmware, but there's a whole lot that aren't.
I will say that, on Windows, things have gotten better, but every week did we lose Tyler?
Yeah, we did.
Oh, crap. So my story number 27, no more access denied. I am a trusted installer. Great article. I don't know if you abused the trusted installer account, Larry, when you were, phoning Windows systems. But essentially, it boils down to, and I quote from the article.
Which story is this?
27. If we can create a process using the token from this trustedinstaller.exe, we might become trusted installer, and then we can delete the Defender directory in basically remove Windows Defender from the system, or deactivate it. Deactivate is the term I was looking for.
Which then you don't need to worry about necessarily trusted installer and.
Well, trusted installer was the catalyst, the initial vector is I'm on the system.
Yeah.
I believe I have to become administrator. Then I still can't disable Defender because there's deeper protections. To get around those deeper protections, I have to get a token issued to basically impersonate the trusted installer, which is the level of privilege that protects the system from deactivation of Windows or Microsoft Defender, whatever they're calling it these days. Microsoft Defender, I believe is what or Defender, we'll just say. So, but the write-up was very good. That was a very high-level overview. That article is very well written. From 4Core is the company that produces Block. I like it. I don't know if it's necessarily new. That's when we go to Tyler. I don't know if this is a new thing or a semi-new thing or an old thing that's been perfected. But
I will go out on a limb here and say that Tyler will say, "Oh yeah, it's a relatively new thing. So we've been doing that for a long time."
Yeah, exactly. Because
I know
there's nothing new, Paul. Come on.
You're right. You're right, Jeff. As the more time goes on, I realize there's nothing new. There is another Windows backdoor. My story number 30 as well, kind of along those lines. This one was in IIS, but an attacker has to compromise a system and I believe inject malicious code into the memory of a DLL file, which gives them access to all HTTP requests. And so you can imagine the hilarity that ensues after that. That was another great write-up. This was written up in Ars Technica, and the source from that comes from Symantec. Two very well-written articles as well. You should definitely check those out. My story number 30.
Speaking of what is old is new again, and we talk about some of that firmware stuff. My story number 2, I believe it was, Osprey pump controller.
Yeah. From
PacketStorm. Well, I appreciated this on so many levels. One, the Osprey pump controller is a retrofit for potentially non-connected systems to do pump control in like ICS, SCADA, manufacturing, that type of stuff. So you can connect your pumps to the internet.
What kind of pump? Like, are we talking water pump?
Water, chemical, irrigation, any of those types of things. Whether
so this is like you've got basically, for lack of a better term, an analog pump.
Yep, an analog pump that pumps liquid.
Connecting this digital device so you can control said pump.
Yep.
Like a PLC, sort of, but in a specific application, sure.
Yep. And can be tied to PLCs to trigger any of the ladder logic and all of that type of stuff. Yeah, what struck me on a couple of things here is allegedly how simple this unauthenticated remote code execution was. 2, the extensive use of ASCII art. And
that's what got me. It's like, holy mackerel.
And 3, this is
half ASCII art.
Yeah, and 3, the fact that you need to have Pygame installed as a module because they use it to play MIDI music while the exploit is launching.
This is cool.
For something super simple, stupid, like, super simple, stupid for the attack, but
unauthenticated remote code execution,
which is bad. But
which is bad.
Yeah.
But
they don't write code like this anymore. They used to.
It looks like it's over 100 lines of code that probably could have been done in 50 lines of code. But most of it is comments in ASCII art and code that implements the MIDI play that happens on it, which is just, just taunt. That's taunting, like penalty taunting.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
This guy would have to be a lot of fun to work with. The guy who wrote this.
I like how he has a function, pump it up. Yeah, definitely. I like code that has a sense of humor inside of it.
Vulnerability discovered by Gyoko Liquidworm Christic. Sorry, my bad. The Macedonian Information Security Research and Development Laboratory.
So, did you guys pick up on Microsoft's use of AI to prevent business email compromise?
No, they're building that into their. What is it?
It's in Defender endpoint, and you need the Defender identity product as well. But basically, instead of using IOCs, they're now going to use the stuff from OpenAI to detect the business email compromise type of activities and automatically lock out accounts so that things get shut down faster.
Which you got to be careful with, though. If you've got an automated algorithm, I mean, this bit me, certainly, and many of us back in the day, when you use those automated detection mechanisms. And sure, we're using a way more advanced AI algorithm than we were using. We weren't using AI and ML back in the day to do this. We were using more automated mechanisms to go heuristics. Like, if this happens, then
it was AI ML, Paul. We just didn't call it that.
That's right. That's right. It was a bunch of if statements, which is ML. But
I mean, if it acts like a duck and it quacks like, if it acts like a duck and it smells like duck, but quacks like a chicken, close enough.
Yes, close enough. Like, disable the account, close off the firewall port, do this automated action. Attackers could use that against you by spoofing an attack, right? And there was a lot of, like, back in the day references to that. That's my concern with this story, Lee, is that an attacker that can trick the AI into going, well, you should disable all these accounts, can basically cause a denial of service condition on the organization.
Right. So I'm more excited about the fact they're moving beyond traditional IOCs into something a little smarter to figure it out. I am not unconcerned about false positives.
Yes.
And or opportunity. I just think this
it's not an
good
attacker.
that they're trying to raise the bar.
You do it to yourself.
I'm waiting for others to jump on that bandwagon, because I think right now we've got to find better ways to help detect this crap and shut it down. And maybe you put it in reporting mode first. Don't put it in actively blocking. But I think you'd still find a lot of stuff that you'd want to start acting on.
Yeah, because oftentimes you shoot yourself in the foot with stuff like this too, where it's actually legitimate activity, but it's classified as illegitimate activity by the AI engine, and therefore I just disabled 30,000 accounts within my organization. By the way, I only have 40,000 accounts, and that's a really bad day for me.
Yeah, no, that's a resume tuning moment.
Mm-hmm.
Ask me how I know this. No.
We've all been there. We've all been there. Michael Atfield's tech blog had a post, my story number 28, on trusted boot. And it was, I don't know how much discussion, banter we want to have about it, but it was a very well constructed post in that it walked through the kind of attack and defend timeline for all things that are trying to protect the boot process on computers. What I thought was interesting to talk about in the article that maybe we do banter about for a little while, that's kind of fun to think about, is that it says in the article, one of the best ways to make sure your device tamper evident is low tech is to use rainbow glitter nail polish on your laptop. And I know you folks are like, what does rainbow glitter nail polish have
where do you put it?
So what you do is, and again, I want to take away from the article, but I want to talk about the kind of a humorous aspect of the article. Article's great in chronicling it. I saw a screen, one of the photos, I believe it was this article, that I was like, wait, that's a presentation on bypassing secure boot. I'm like, wait, that's Yuri, one of the founders of the company I work for called Eclipsium, in that photo, which was kind of interesting. So they did a great job. But the glitter nail polish, I think this originated to Tremel Hudson, who's done a lot of research and publications on firmware based security and secure boot. But so basically what you do is on your laptop, right, you've got screws underneath that would allow access to the internals of your computer. So on the exposed screws underneath your laptop, you take this so the glitter is actually very important. Like normal nail polish would work, but you want some with some glitter, some sparkle in it, sparkle nail polish. You put that over all of the exposed screws in your laptop. If an attacker, so this is the evil maid attack, I leave my laptop somewhere, maybe in my hotel room, and someone tampers with. Someone removes the screws from this laptop.
Yep.
Tampers with the internal hardware, puts all the screws back. What you do is I should preface this, after you put the nail polish on and it dries, you take a picture of each one of the screws. You store those photos somewhere. When you come back to your room, you look at the nail polish on the other side of your laptop and you compare the pattern of the sparkles on your laptop to the pattern of the sparkles on the original photo that you took when you put them there. And you can compare these photos and determine if it's been tampered with. Because if it's been tampered with, some of those sparkles are going to move around a little bit, and it's not going to exactly match up. Now, Trammell says normal glitter polish works as well, although the features are smaller and have lower contrast than the fuzzy coat shown above. So he has actually researched nail polish. He also says you can do your nails with it too and look fabulous while you're coding. Which I think is just one of my favorite statements.
And why wouldn't I use a regular TID?
A what?
A tamper indicating device, a TID.
Is that something that goes over the screws, Lee, or is that something in the hardware?
You can put it across. You can put it you can put it over the screws. You can put it across a joint.
It's like the stuff you see at the gas stations.
The idea is you have to break it to.
Okay.
Just go to the tamper evident village. And
or duct tape.
Well, I've seen some of that. Yeah, that does actually.
Well, I think
the problem.
I would guess the nail polish is very low cost.
Yeah,
and gives you it gives you that telemetry with the sparkle pattern that can be easily detected. Again, for a low cost. And I don't know what nail polish goes for these days, but
a couple bucks. Yeah. $4 or $5. Now,
if the screw is depressed and you're putting a little bit of a blob of nail polish on it, couldn't you just pop it off and put it back on again?
Potentially.
If we're going down this road?
Potentially. Yep. I mean, but you'd have to put it back in the exact same pattern, Jeff, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's not impossible, but...
you take a picture before you do it, and you...
Yeah, I take a picture after.
Put it back in.
But it raises the bar. And back to our economics, right? It certainly makes this physical attack... harder to pull off, more expensive to pull off. Yep. You're going to go buy your own nail. You're going to match the nail. I don't know if you match
I'd also argue that you could probably get the screws back in very close.
This is like going back to, I think 60s version of James Bond movies where
absolutely.
he put a hair across the door jamb and just licked it to get it to stick type of thing. I mean, that's what we're talking
Which about. James Bond film was that in? That was it was in one of them.
I want to say that was Dr. It's one of the first.
Was it Dr. No? Was it?
It might have been.
Oh, someone fact check us on that. I'm curious if it was Dr. No. He's in a hotel room somewhere.
It was Dr. No.
Was it?
Man,
He puts the
licks
hair.
the hair and sticks
it.
One
of the first ones.
Yeah. Which was like, oh my God, I don't even want to think how long ago it was.
Goldfinger? Was it Goldfinger? My guess is Goldfinger. That's my guess.
To the Google machine. I don't know how you do it other than watch the movies.
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Right. That's
from
Google.
Goldfinger.
Ask ChatGPT this question.
Isn't Dr. No? This says Dr. No.
Is it Dr. No? I thought it was Dr. No.
Yeah, I thought it was Dr. No.
Doctor, yes.
Come on, mouse.
I think it says Dr.
Anyway,
No.
well, let's keep going.
It's hard to...
I just closed it. No, I didn't.
This one says
there's actually a lot of results, but I haven't
there are.
seen
Like it's hard to. No, Dr. No was the first James Bond movie placing a damp hair across the closet door. Yeah, I'm going with Dr. No. It's Dr. No.
It's Dr. No. Dr. No for the win.
Dr. No for the
final answer.
Final answer.
So how about one last story before?
Glad we sorted that out.
How about one last story before we round this out, Paul?
Let's do it on that story.
Jeff, you want to pick this one?
I had one up that I did want to talk about. Which one was it? It was one of Mandy's stories. We could construe it to be on a lighter note. 1 in 4 CISOs wants to say sayonara to security.
Yeah, I got sucked in by this headline too. And when I originally read the headline, I'm like, what, CISOs don't want to do security anymore? Like, they don't want to, like, implement security in the organizations? No, they're just freaking burned out. They want to do something different that's not security.
Well, I think there's a lot of, it depends on what industry you're in, right? That the role of the CISO is very different. Yeah. You have to be an enabler for the business, but apply some security. And I think security does kind of go by the wayside in a lot of those where it's not as a high level of security as we maybe a lot of practitioners would like to see, but it's enabling the business. It's a fine line. I don't know. It's a difficult role.
Well, I think
that's why we have a whole show dedicated to it.
It's more, I mean, we've touched on it tonight a couple times. It's the economic factor. I mean, how many years have we, I mean, this goes back almost to the beginning for me, at least in the private sector. You're the security professional. You see what's wrong and you know what needs to be done. And everybody's like, yeah, but nothing's happened yet. Yeah, that costs money. Do we really have to bother with that? At some level, even companies that take it seriously, they still have to make economic decisions about how much they're going to invest in doing certain things. And I remember I went to a talk several years ago. I think it was at I don't want to say it on there. It was, all right, I'll say it was a Gartner event, I think. And a friend of mine was giving a talk, and he started the talk with, okay, everybody raise your hand. How much, how many people, have enough in their budget to do all the things they want to do with security? And everybody's like chuckling, laugh. And I was like, yeah, you better raise your hand, because whatever you have, that's kind of what you got to work with. So you may not think it's enough, but it's enough for the practical purposes. You gotta work with what you've got.
It may not be Mrs. Right, but it's Mrs. Right now.
Something like that.
Well, I did want.
You can't love the one you want, love the one you're with, even if it's a Cray XMP. If you're following the Discord chat,
it's I just before we close out, Mandy had another article. I was hoping that she would be here for it, but it's a sticky story: how and why hackers love stickers on laptops. And I thought it was it's a very lengthy article, actually. I don't know that I can draw. I didn't read the entire article. It kind of jumps around all over the place and kind of concludes with, so will legitimacy and professionalism ultimately kill sticker culture? They say it seems unlikely. The need for authenticity and self-expression among humans is an all-consuming urge that cuts to the very core of our existence. Wow, this article is actually very well written as well. I appreciate the writing style. Thank you.
It was deep. I think one of the other things that they got to with the article is that, you think about so many of the computer people are introverts, and by putting stickers on your laptop, you can have a self-expression about what makes you excited and gives you an ability to have a feeling of belonging as part of a subculture in a group of folks.
But the article talks about the free Kevin stickers. It talks about, I think it interviews Casey Ellis.
It does?
Yeah. Because
Grace Hopper has a posse?
Well, Casey had I don't think Casey came up with it, but it was BugCrowd that came up with it. My other computer is your computer. Yep. Casey was actually just telling me not that long ago, how he's still amazed, how that just took off, it was something they created and it kind of just took off. And what I was telling folks at my day job, I'm like, that's a really hard thing to recreate, right? And we created the hack naked thing on a whim, right? And there's a whole story behind, the hack naked thing. But there's a story behind some of the more popular ones, like Casey was describing. And I feel like there's a couple of other cybersecurity vendors actually that have a story behind. There's very few that create a sticker or a shirt with a slogan on it that really kind of takes off and becomes part of this elite class and subculture of something that everyone gets behind and they think is really cool, and an expression of who we are as a community, I think, is what they ultimately have in common, or just something really funny that kind of brings us together, like Hack Naked, right? There's those things are really hard to recreate. Because some of it is just luck, right?
I mean, I have two of my favorite shirts. One of them I really can't wear anymore, but one of them is a bright royal blue shirt with orange printing of a silhouette of Alan Turing, and it says Enigma ? and it's from Optin. And I love that shirt just because of what it is. The other one was done by, oh crap, I can't remember his name. Brian. Either way. And it's a white T-shirt, so I've worn it so many times it's no longer white anymore. But it's an old school like ink illustration of a vampire wearing a top hat, carrying a briefcase with a little blood dripping out of his teeth, and it says "professional consultant."
Yeah. Wow.
I found when I started doing more management level stuff, management meetings, I wasn't comfortable anymore with all the stickers on the laptop.
I go back and forth. Yeah, I agree. I agree, Lee, especially when you put your laptop, it's interesting. It's because to me, right, my laptop doesn't have anything on it yet. And even though I've had this laptop for a little while now, I don't know if I want the full laptop, what do they call that? Skin, thank you. Or if I want to put individual stickers on it. But also part of the concern over the years for me, and I'm sure many of us, is when you get into certain situations, you're presenting or going to meet with folks and you pull out your laptop. It's got all these stickers that say all these kind of ridiculous, what other people would perceive as ridiculous things that in our community, in our culture, we perceive as representations of us. And a lot of them are tongue-in-cheek, inside joke kind of things that we have this mutual understanding that we're not really evil, but we have a sticker that Kevin Johnson, professionally evil. It's a great slogan. It's a great,
yes, it is.
Great slogan. So, that I share your concern there, Lee, is different people have different perspectives and on what we, on how we express ourselves, right? And you have to be careful. We certainly felt that with the Hack Naked logo and all the iterations of it and such.
Don't let anybody tell you I don't love the stickers on the laptop. I think they're really cool, and I love looking at what people are doing. There's just a context where I'm not comfortable with them on my laptop, but I'd love for everybody to show me what they're doing. That's always neat.
Yep, like my laptop.
Your laptop is sticker. You've done the sticker thing.
Have you noticed there's one or two stickers on Larry's laptop?
Yeah, there's one, and this is my personal laptop, so there's lots of fun stuff on here. There's like some knives and maker groups, and
it's an expression of you.
Yeah, and it was funny. A couple months ago, shortly after I left in Guardians, one of the Guardians folks, was tuning into the show, and she says, "You've got my sticker on your laptop," and it's the advanced persistent wish.
Yeah. Some of it is like paying homage to our cohorts and friends as well. Like, hey, I support you. Like, I got your sticker on my laptop. Kind of. It was something I've always loved and thankful for. Is people have the Hack Naked stickers on their laptops, and it shows their their support for us over the years. So it's really cool. I thought it was a really cool article.
It's fun.
Yeah,
fun. Yeah, it was all over the place, but they tied it all together nicely.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you everyone for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. We'll see you next time. Larry, take us out.
Over and